Good morning, students. So today's topic is going to be future simple with will and going to. Again, this is just a review. You guys already saw this information in your book. So feel free to ask me any other questions that you may still have. Send them to my chat or send them to Blackboard. All right. So without any further ado, we're going to start. First off, why do we use will? All right. So as the book mentioned, we use will to predict the future. Okay. So that is one of the most basic uses that we can use will, and that's the only use we're going to give will as of right now, okay? So make sure that you remember that, predictions. Here in this next slide, we're going to analyze the structure. So here's how the structure for will works. First off, we have our subject, then we have our will, the verb in base form, and lastly, the complement. This is for affirmative, of course. So we are going to start with this first example, which is Tanjiro will become a demon. So this is following our affirmative structure. What happens if we want to make it a negative? It's very simple. We just add not to our auxiliary will. So it's going to be will not. And remember that usually when we speak in English, we try and contract. That's the most common way people speak, which is contracting a lot of words because they want to get their information across quite fast. So our example would be Tanjiro won't become a demon instead of will not. And if we want to make it a question, the same way we make every other question where we change the first two and we swap their places, the first two things of our structure. In this case, we're going to do the same thing. So we're changing the subject and will. We're changing their positions. So now we're going to start with will, and then we're going to proceed to the subject. As our example would be, will Tanjiro become a demon? All right. So that would be our question form. Be very careful when we're making questions. Our first language is Spanish in our particular case. So remember that in Spanish, we do not change any of we don't change any words placement when we're making a question. We just add like a specific tone at the end that makes it sound like a question. But in English, we do have to change it, okay? We can't just say Danger will become a demon. No, we can't say that. We need to actually change the word's placement for it to sound like a question. Moving on, here are some more examples in this next slide that have to do with will being used for predictions. So we can see at the beginning, the sun will rise at 7 a.m. Our class was at 7 a.m. and the sun wasn't up. So obviously my prediction was incorrect. But in the case of the World Cup, I think Mexico will win the 2026 World Cup. So that is my personal prediction. Maybe a lot of people will not agree with me, but that is my personal prediction. This next example has to do with the anime of Demon Slayer. So we have two characters which we can see in the image, and my prediction is that Tanjiro will kiss Kanao. All right. This hasn't happened yet in the anime, but this is my personal prediction that it's going to happen. It will happen. Okay, so for negatives, we have, as we can see from the other examples, we were using won't, right? So this is the only thing that we're adding. We won't go to Disneyland this year. We won't have another month of quarantine. Some students won't pass the semester. Be very careful with this last one. Make sure that you're not one of these students. So again, we're just adding won't to that structure. And when it comes time to do questions, remember that we just swap the placement. So we move will until at the beginning of our sentence. Okay, we move it from where it was to the beginning of the sentence. So our sentence is going to look something like, will you finish the project on time? All right, so that is our general structure. What happens if we want more details? Because this is just a yes or no question. What happens if I want to know like why? Why will you finish the project on time? That's an example. Well, the WH question words are going to go at the beginning. So they're going to have priority over every other part of the structure. However, our structure does not move. Our structure does not change. It stays exactly the same. We just add the WH question word at the beginning, as we can see right there. As we can see right here, where will you go for lunch? Why will people study online? Okay, so we just have to remember that if we want to apply a WH question word, it has to be at the beginning. So this is very important from our book. It wanted us to use either the word get or become and add a comparative adjective at the end. This is just going to be to describe, to predict a description, basically. All right, so we have summers will get hotter. There we have will, and right after that we're using get and our comparative adjective. Can we make questions with this format? Of course we can. We have the last one which says, will food become more expensive? Right? We just have to remember that when we're making questions, we have to put will at the beginning. Will food become more expensive? Right? That's the only thing we have to remember. Then we have the word become and our comparative adjective, which is more expensive. If you guys have trouble with comparatives, you don't remember them, make sure that you go over to your notes or basically Google them. But you guys need to make sure that you know comparatives before you start applying this part of the knowledge, like this part of the topic. Do not try to make sentences without actually reviewing this first. Very well. So we get to some more examples with get or become. These are just so you guys can see them a little bit better. I took the liberty of writing down in bold get or become, and then the comparative adjective is underlined so it's more visible. So in the first example, we can see people will get better with time. The world will become more unstable. Food will become more expensive, and so on. Make sure that you guys analyze where we're adding get, become, and where we're adding the comparative adjective. This is all right after will. All right. So we move on to our next part of the topic, which is going to. So when do we use going to? Why do we use it? Well, we use going to if we have a plan. All right. This is gonna be the main use that we're gonna use it. At least this is one of the main uses, and this is the only use we're gonna focus on as of right now. So we're gonna use going to for plans. Very well. Here's how it works. This is the structure for going to. I apologize if it's a little bit convoluted. All of this information might be a little bit too cluttered, like a lot. But bear with me and just try and pay as close enough of attention as you can. So we start with the subject, obviously. Then we have our verb to be. Remember that we always use one of these three forms of the verb to be, either am, is, or are, depending on our subject. Then we're going to use going to, our verb in base form, and complement. When do we use am? We use it with I. When do we use is? He, she, its. The rest of them go with are. I suggest that you guys, if you do not remember this, make a quick note on the side, and anytime you have to make a sentence, check the structure and check those notes so you do not make a mistake. All right? What happens if we want to make a negative sentence? Very easy. We just have to make that verb to be into a negative by adding not. Remember, like I already mentioned with will, we try to always contract as much as possible. So in this case, we're going to be using isn't and aren't as our contracted versions, all right? Here in our questions, we're going to do the same thing. So we need to change our auxiliary. In this case, it's the verb to be, and our subjects, the placement in the sentence. So we need to start with the verb to be. Okay, so we can see it clearly right here. Is now going to find butterflies. We do not change anything else in the structure. The only thing we change is the subject and the verb to be. We just change their placements, and that's going to make it a question. Very well, we move on to more examples. Here are some more examples dealing with going to. The first one says the following. The president is going to give a speech at 7 p.m. I'm going to do my homework at night. Tanjiro and his friends are going to play tomorrow. All right, so all of these are plans that we already made or that were already made. So that's why we're going to use going to. Remember that we use going to for plans. We can also use it for negatives. In the case that somebody doesn't have a plan. For example, my siblings aren't going to go on vacations, so they don't have a plan. At least that's not their plan. They're not going to go on vacations. So that is our basic structure. Remember that if we want to use negatives, we have to make sure that we know we match the verb to be with our subject. In this case, siblings, they are. And then we have the teacher is. So we have the verb to be, the teacher, either it's a he or a she, and well, obviously it's going to be used with is. He is, she is, right? So make sure that you always keep that in mind. As for questions, it has the same structure as will. Well, it follows the same structure, sorry. In this case, we always start with the verb to be instead of with will. So is Julieta going to come to the meeting? The same way we add a WH question for will, we're going to follow the same instructions for going to. So we're going to add the WH question at the beginning, right? So why is Julieta going to come to the meeting? If we want to ask for more detail, right? Something else than a yes or no question. So we can see it in the other example too. When are we going to have on normal classes? So we're adding the WH question word at the beginning. The rest of the structure remains untouched. What happens if we have yes or no questions? Well, we're going to have answers that match those questions, right? Here are just some basic examples that you guys can follow if you want to give short answers. So we have, for example, at the beginning, we have questions who will. Will they win the tournament? Yes, they will. No, they won't. Will she pass her exam? Yes, she will. No, she won't. So depending on the auxiliary that they're using is the one that we're going to answer. We can see it in bold right there. If they're asking with will, we're going to answer with will, either in an affirmative way or a negative way. We can also see that it doesn't matter what pronoun we're using, right? We're using they will, she will. It's going to be will for all of them. However, this becomes maybe a little bit more complex when we're talking about going to. Why? Because we have three different answers that we can give depending on the pronoun that we're using, right? For example, are we going to play soccer after this class? Yes, we are. No, we aren't. So we have to use are. The key here, like if you're answering, is to check. Pay attention to what verb to be they're using. All right, what is the auxiliary they're using? Because you're going to use that same auxiliary to answer. Are we? Yes, we are. Is she going to run the marathon on Monday? Yes, she is. Is she going? So I'm going to answer with is. No or no, she isn't. Remember, this can be affirmative or negative depending if you're saying yes or no. And in the last case, am I going to participate in this activity? I just did it with the I just so it's a little bit more visual. Usually we don't ask ourselves questions, or at least in most cases. Sometimes we do, depending. But normally somebody would ask you, right? Are you going to participate in this activity? And then you would answer, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. Okay, so it was just done in this way, so you can see that we're using the verb am, the verb to be in its am form. But make sure that you just pay attention to what verb to be or auxiliary they're using, what form of the verb to be, what auxiliary they are using, so you can answer with that one. Okay, that's going to be as simple as that. It's very important to remember that we usually contract. All right, contractions are super, super essential because it makes you sound more native, more like you've had more practice with the language when you're speaking. So we have to be able to contract as much as we can. We only saw contractions in negatives in the examples that we saw prior to this one. So we saw won't, we saw isn't, aren't. So those were the examples that we saw for contractions. But if we have affirmatives, can we contract? Yes, we can. We can always contract. So what are we going to contract in affirmatives? Well, if we're talking about will, we're going to contract the pronoun and will. All right, so I will becomes I'll, you will becomes you'll, she will becomes she'll, etc. If we're talking about the verb to be, which would be used with going to, we're going to contract the pronoun and then the verb to be itself. So we have I am becomes I'm, you are becomes your, she is becomes she's. Okay, so just make sure that you practice these contractions if you don't remember them properly. Here are some more examples that have to do with our contractions. So the first one, we'll pass the semester, she'll talk to the teacher, I'll do all of my homework. Next one, I'm going to visit my grandparents. She's going to travel to Japan next month. They're going to participate in the play. All right, so practice those contractions so you sound much more natural, much more fluent. So last, we arrived to our question section. If you guys have any questions, any doubts, feel free to ask me, send me a message to our messenger group or to my email, but make sure that you send me a message. Do not have any doubts, all right? Or if you really do not want to Google the answers, but make sure that uh, you do something. Don't do not give up on the topic. It's super easy if you put in a little bit of effort. All right, so make a concept map. This is the homework. Make the concept map, send it to our platform, Blackboard, and that would be it from my part. I will leave you with these um, references that I used in case you want to practice some. And the website that I used, you can also find some exercises that you can either yeah, well, I would suggest that you guys do them online. It's gonna give you the answer if you made any mistakes or not. And we also used the book. The book was very helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to also access the book. All right. So that would be on my part. Thank you for paying attention. Make sure you hand in your assignment on time, and I'll see you next time.